can read a lot into a face, not just about thoughts and emotions, but also where we come from, about our origins.
Look in the mirror, and it's thousands of years of history that look back at you. Written into our facial features is a story going back countless generations. It's a story of migration and integration, of conquest and war.
We look as we do because of our genes. Genes that have been handed down through countless generations. In this series, we'll be giving the results of the biggest ever genetic survey of Britain. For the first time, we will know the true ancestry of the British regions. The survey promises some remarkable answers and big surprises in revealing who we really are.
I'll be meeting famous faces and ordinary people to find out how many of us are descended from ancient Celts, Anglo-Saxon farmers, Viking warriors, and Norman invaders.
In different parts of Britain, people have different accents. Why? Because, over the centuries, Picts, Norsemen, Anglo-Saxons and so on have settled in varying numbers in different parts of the country and given each region its own identity. But as you cross Britain, you won't just find different accents. Amazingly, people in different regions also look different, thanks to the peculiar mix of genes handed down from our ancient ancestors. The question is, how can we decode the history written in our faces? In a landmark research project, scientists from Oxford University and the Wellcome Trust are taking DNA samples from thousands of volunteers across the country.
Okay, thank you.
It's the biggest ever survey of the genetic makeup of the British people. The results could bring us face to face with our ancient ancestors and may even rewrite the history of Britain.
As an archaeologist, I'm fascinated with unearthing clues about our dim and distant past. But some of the most exciting new evidence doesn't come from the ground, but from inside our bodies, from our DNA.
The man in charge of this epic survey is Sir Walter Bodmer, one of the world's leading geneticists.
Our genetic makeup is determined by what we inherit from mother and father, and the sperm and the egg unite to form a single cell which contains the complete instruction set for how to make a human being, the famous DNA molecule. So you can take any bit of that and find a difference between you and me in it.
Sir Walter's team are looking for genetic differences between people in different parts of Britain. From these, they hope to tell which ancient people settled where, and in what numbers. What will emerge is the first ever DNA map of Britain, which reveals the true origins of today's Scots, East Anglians, Geordies, and so on. It'll be a kind of genetic Domesday Book, which promises to answer some of the questions that have puzzled historians for generations. So, when the scientists poke around in our DNA, who are they hoping to find? Well, as far as we can tell, the first people to settle permanently in Britain were small bands of hunter-gatherers who came from southern Europe around 12,000 years ago. Their descendants were the savage, flame-haired Celts who, daubed in blue woad, tried in vain to repel the Roman legions 2,000 years ago. After the Romans, in the 5th and 6th centuries, came the trouser-clad Angles and Saxons from Germany and Denmark. Then came the fearsome Viking raiders in their longboats in the 9th and 10th centuries from Denmark and Norway. And in 1066, in the last great invasion of Britain, William the Conqueror led his Norman army to victory at Hastings. Each group brought to Britain its own language, customs, some new faces, and also, crucially for Sir Walter's study, a distinctive genetic profile. Already, Sir Walter and his team have established that many people from Devon, Cornwall and southwest Wales can trace their ancestry to the ancient Celts and beyond, back to the hunter-gatherers who first came here when Britain was still connected to Europe by land. But where does Celtic Britain end and Anglo-Saxon Britain begin? Sir Walter's team have now crossed the country and are collecting DNA samples from volunteers up and down the east coast of England. To qualify for the study, their families must have been based in the region for at least 3 generations.
We're looking for people who live in rural areas, and all 4 of whose grandparents came from that area. People who've lived there for eons and still don't move very far away.
These are the people who are most likely to have links with the area stretching back to ancient and medieval times.
My family were born in Norwich.
Both sides of my family were based in Norfolk going back to the 17th century.
I can trace back to my great-grandparents. They all came within 5-mile radius of Stowmarket.
If I could trace my family back to the Anglo-Saxons or Vikings or whatever, that'd be very interesting.
I often imagine I'm Roman.
I might be one of them Viking people, you know.
Sir Walter's team are hoping to discover the extent and the character of the Anglo-Saxon invasions. Historians believe that between the 5th and 8th centuries AD, the so-called Dark Ages, various groups from continental Europe landed on the east coast of Britain. Saxons from northern Germany, Jutes from southern Scandinavia, and Angles and Frisians from Denmark and northern Holland. But how many of them came over is a mystery. And so is what happened next. In this part of Britain, all traces of Celtic culture seem to have disappeared when the Anglo-Saxons arrived. But does that mean the Angles and Saxons got rid of the Celts? Or did they just force the Celts to adopt Anglo-Saxon customs and language? The Romans managed to establish their laws, language and culture throughout their empire without settling in large numbers. Did the Anglo-Saxons do the same? It's a question which has divided historians for generations. The answer may lie hidden in the DNA of people like Catherine Mayhew. Catherine is one of the East Anglian volunteers. She's from a very old Suffolk farming family, so she's a perfect candidate for the genetic test. Her DNA and her face may hold the clue to the ancient history of this region. So, is she Anglo-Saxon or Celt?
Why did you want to take part in the test in the first place?
Because I'd love to know. I'd love to know where I came from. You know, all the way back, all those thousands of years back. To be able to trace it, I think would be incredible.
Do you think you look like someone from here, act like someone from here?
I don't know about acting like someone from here, but I think I definitely look like someone from here. I think they're predominantly dark.
What do you think or even hope that they'll say about you?
Well, I'd love, if I could, I'd love to come from, the original tribe, the Icenies. This would be,
right.
Yeah, rather nice. I reckon it'll be more like...
Oh, so you want Boudica's blood running in your veins?
Well, it'd be nice, but I think she was more Norfolk. It'd be lovely, yeah, who wouldn't?
Analysing the results will take several weeks. In the meantime, to help interpret the DNA, I need to explore the archaeological record, examine some linguistic clues, and then compare these with the new evidence to be found in our genes. Evidence of the original English.
Will we find their traces living on in the DNA of Catherine and other East Anglians?
I'm on the trail of the Anglo-Saxon warriors who invaded Britain in the Dark Ages. And I've heard a rumour that they're alive and well and living in Norwich. Scientists from Oxford University are searching for a clear genetic sign of the Angles and Saxons in DNA collected from volunteers throughout East Anglia. But while the team are holding their test tubes up to the light and scratching their chins, I'm off to examine some historical clues. As far as we can tell, the Anglo-Saxons first came to Britain as hired muscle.
When the Roman army left Britain in 410 AD, there was a rapid breakdown of law and order. Towns that had been run and protected by the Romans were raided by barbarians from Ireland, from Scotland and the continent. So in a desperate bid to protect themselves, civic leaders hired mercenaries from Europe, Angles and Saxons from northern Germany and southern Denmark.
The trouble with mercenaries is they start off taking orders, but often end up giving them. Within just a few generations, the Anglo-Saxon heavies were lording it over the Celts. Anglo-Saxon kings ruled in Northumbria, Mercia, Wessex, Kent, and here in East Anglia.
One of the greatest mysteries surrounding the Anglo-Saxons is how they managed to dominate Britain in such a relatively short period of time. If they came in their rampaging pagan hordes, slaughtering the locals and replacing them with thousands of immigrants from Germany or Holland, all of them keen to take advantage of this rich farmland, then that would have had a huge impact on the genetics of the region.
But if, like the Romans, the Anglo-Saxons were no more than a small ruling elite, then ancient Celtic genes should still be dominant in people living in eastern England today. The famous burial site at Sutton Hoo is one of the most important pieces of evidence for the Anglo-Saxon conquest. Archaeologists believe this is the tomb of King Redvald, a powerful Angle king who ruled here in the early 600s. The king was buried here in a great ship, 27 metres long, loaded with jewellery, armour and a fabulously ornate helmet. This is a replica, but the original, encrusted with jewels, testifies to the wealth and therefore power of the Anglo-Saxon elite. An archaeologist who specialises in Anglo-Saxon remains is Angus Wainwright.
Everything about this smacks of a dominant individual, doesn't it? I'm trying to find out whether Anglo-Saxons came here en masse in great numbers, or whether it was just a powerful man and some followers. What do you think?
The two ideas is it must be a mass of people because the language changed abruptly from a Celtic language and Latin to a Germanic language that we know as English, and all the burials changed from being in a Roman or Celtic tradition to being in an absolutely Germanic tradition. So something dramatic has happened and people think it must be a big wave of invaders or colonists. Other people now are suggesting that actually what happened was that a few war bands came over with strong leaders and just took out the top level of society. And because...
Coup?
Yeah, effectively.
Can I try that on?
So on the one hand, we have a small band of vicious Anglo-Saxon warriors.
Is it saying dominance?
It is. I'm feeling terrified.
And on the other, a larger number of pliant Celtic farmers, enfeebled by centuries of Pax Romana, but now forced into servitude beneath the Anglo-Saxon yoke.
Beautiful.
If this picture is right, the DNA of our volunteers will still be predominantly Celtic. The science works like this. Sir Walter's team are looking for hundreds of different genes on the strands of DNA taken from each volunteer. The pattern of genes can then be compared between individuals, between regions, and with similar studies abroad.
You and I are enormously similar genetically, enormously similar, and yet we're also enormously different. There may be thousands, millions of differences, and those differences will vary in different populations in their frequencies.
What Sir Walter is producing is, in effect, a genetic historical map, indicating which ancient people settled where and in what number. As we've seen, the team have already established that people in the West Country and South West Wales are overwhelmingly Celtic. But what about East Anglia? Former racing champion and Formula One commentator Martin Brundle has donated a sample of his DNA to the project. He He wants to find out whether his ancient ancestors were Anglo-Saxon or Celt.
Here's from my mum and dad's wedding.
Oh, that's a great picture. That's the usual suspects, isn't it?
So that's my granddad and grandmother on my father's side, whose wedding we're at there, mum, in a very trendy skirt.
Martin qualifies for the study because all 4 of his grandparents came from Norfolk.
When it comes to the results of the genetic tests, do you have any expectations of them or even any hopes?
It'd be really interesting to see how many centuries ago we did settle. All my grandparents, great-grandparents, they were from farming stock. And why would, where would they have come from? They're only going to have inherited the land over the years and worked the land, I would have thought.
Martin's surname is an important clue to his origins. And, with a little help from the University of London, I've been doing some detective work.
This was the situation in 1998. OK? Now, the darker the colour, basically, the more prevalent are people with your surname. So you can see it's still got a heartland in Norfolk, but there is a spread. But if we go back 120 odd years,
wow,
you're all here.
Yeah.
Which I think is quite amazing. It's as though when Mr. and Mrs. Brundle came, they landed here and stayed here. There's no experimentation with any other location.
So the farming stock that I thought my family came from seems to be correct.
If the Brundles...
The remarkably tight geographical distribution of Brundles perfectly illustrates the way people in the countryside tend to stay put from one generation to the next. The name Brundle is derived from the word brun, or brown, and suggests a physical characteristic like brown hair or eyes. And such physical traits are, of course, genetic. Among ancient peoples, whose societies were far more closed and stable than today's, such genes would over time give a community a certain common look. A look which some of us may have inherited.
We know that Angles played a significant role in the history of East Anglia. No surprises there, obviously. And I'm curious to see if any physical features are more common among East Anglians.
Local photographer Paul Nixon and portrait artist Lizzie Hall have agreed to help me pick out some typical East Anglian faces. And where better than Bury St Edmunds on Market Day?
As an outsider to the area, what should I be looking for in a local face?
I think there's 2 quite distinctive looks in East Anglia. There's a rounder face with quite high cheekbones and chubby cheeks, quite a triangular nose, a little chin, but there's also an oblong face with quite a heavy brow.
When I take pictures, it's the overall effect, so it's kind of a gut feeling, the whole thing, the clothes, the way someone stands.
And how easy do you think it'll be in a town that has obviously got so many incomers in it as well? In the modern era, we're all a mix.
I think we'll be able to pick them out. I'm not going to say it's easy.
Let's put this to the test then. What about the lassie there?
I wouldn't say so.
You wouldn't say so?
No.
What about the woman with the blonde hair on that foot still there, looking at us now? I'm seeing high cheekbones.
Yeah, it's a possibility. It's a possibility. Do keep looking.
They want a big gold tail today. Try before you buy, see this.
The 2 guys on the fruit stand.
What, the young guys?
Yeah. He's got a really heavy brow and the oval face.
Go on.
OK.
The bread on white sea, there's a pounder bowl.
Hi, hello. Do you mind if I ask you, do you come from Suffolk?
Yeah, I do, yeah. Yeah, that's right. I'm 21 years old, born and bred in Suffolk.
Lizzie's first guess is spot on, and Paul moves in for a photo.
The young lady over here with the glasses, how about her?
OK.
This is a real gut feeling.
Excuse us. Ask you a quick question.
Yes?
Are you from this part of the world?
Yes, I am. From Suffolk, born and bred.
Great, that's fine. Thanks very much.
Are you local?
Oh, yes, definitely. Very Suffolk, born and bred.
The market here attracts visitors from far and wide, but Paul and Lizzie are enjoying a 100% hit rate.
Are you a Suffolk man?
I am.
Born and bred?
Suffolk man, born and bred.
I found it hard to tell the difference between locals and outsiders. But as Paul and Lizzie picked faces out of the crowd, I slowly felt like I was beginning to see what they were looking for. There did seem to be a pattern emerging. If these faces do represent a regional look, could it be inherited from the Anglo-Saxon invaders who landed here 1,500 years ago? To find out, I need to know what the old Anglo-Saxons actually looked like. And if anyone can tell me, it's forensic anthropologist Caroline Wilkinson. When archaeologists discovered the remains of a 7th century Anglo-Saxon warrior in Sussex, Caroline rebuilt the skull and recreated his face.
So this is the face of an early Anglo-Saxon man around the age of 30, 35. He was probably 5th century AD.
Right. How do you get to that? From that, what's the first thing you do?
Well, the first thing is to take a look at the skull and try and determine the facial features from that. So, for example, we can look at the bones around the nose to give us an indication of the shape of the nose, and the teeth to tell us about the shape of the mouth. We can look at the brow shape and the orbital shape to tell us about the eyes. So the muscles of the face will be modelled onto the skull, such as up here, one by one, so that the face will grow from the skull outwards.
From the point of view of this Anglo-Saxon face, what are the Anglo-Saxon characteristics that mark it out from maybe another group?
Well, the most notable thing I think about this skull is that it has quite a strong cleft chin and what's known as a bifid nose, which basically means a central groove up the tip of the nose. You can see how the spine is split into two. And
it's two distinct prongs.
It's a characteristic that's associated with Germanic populations, so that would be consistent with his Saxon background.
Looking at the face of Anglo-Saxon man, I feel I should be on the hunt for strong faces with prominent cheekbones, and possibly a Kirk Douglas chin. But is that the look we find in East Anglia? When volunteers for the DNA study gave blood, some also had their photos taken. We asked Dr. Tony Little, an expert in facial recognition, to produce average faces for different parts of Britain using these pictures. And this is the face of East Anglia.
How does that compare to the ancient Anglo-Saxon face?
So here are the two faces side by side. You have the high cheekbones and the slightly pointed chin. The brow ridge seems quite similar between the two images.
Those features that you're describing are the same features that Lizzie, the artist who accompanied me around East Anglia, was looking for.
Bowl of bananas for a pounder.
He's got a really heavy brow.
I think it is really interesting that people's perceptions of what people from East Anglia look like, they do seem to match up to what we found by looking at the composites based on the genetic faces.
You wouldn't call it an identical match, but there's certainly a sense of the same face.
These traits, these smaller jaws, the higher cheekbones, you can see the similarities in these faces.
Okay, thank you.
This face has a quite clearly defined split to the end of the nose and a split to the chin.
If we were to go back to the people who were from the market, I think here you can see some slight split to the male nose and the male chin.
If we're right, the common facial traits that we've observed may indeed point to a genetic legacy stretching all the way back to the Anglo-Saxon conquest. Are we looking at the faces of the Angles and Saxons? I'm on a mission to shed some light on Dark Age Britain with new evidence from within our own DNA. And I've hit upon one basic but strangely difficult question. How English are the English? Or, as an historian would say, how Anglo-Saxon are the English? One important historical clue, so obvious we tend to forget it, is bouncing around your living room right now. The very language I'm using is the product of history. It bears the scars of history, of conquest and assimilation and migration. As well as funny-looking helmets and trousers, the Anglo-Saxons brought English, or something pretty close, Old English. So I've decided to go in search of our mother tongue, to the region of Friesland on the northern tip of Holland, in the hope of finding the oldest form of English and, with any luck, some familiar faces. If you've spent any time travelling through Europe, you may have noticed the changing facial types in different countries. There are more slender aquiline noses in France, more broad-faced blondes in Austria. Coming to Friesland, maybe it's wishful thinking on my part, but there does seem to be something curiously familiar about the faces here. I could just as well be back in Bury St Edmunds, except there are more bicycles and they talk funny.
Je saambreed, wat nou en eigenlijk komen een hele grote vissen komen hier weer op terug, hè?
Except they don't talk that funny. It's tricky to work out what's being said, but the rhythms and timbre of the language is strangely familiar.
Dat is hier in Jouwert. Net. Zit dus koning in het feest. Ja. Zit dus dat is gewoon daar.
This region has its own peculiar dialect, quite distinct from the rest of Holland. So if it isn't Dutch, what is it? I've come armed with a bit of Old English to try a little experiment.
Hallo.
Hallo.
Havest du enige Glaf und Butter und green cheese?
Butter, cheese, yeah.
Yeah? Yeah. Good.
Cheese.
Aha. Yeah.
Butter.
Okay.
Butter.
So, butter and cheese. Butter
and cheese.
You understand, but not Glaf.
Glaf, I don't understand.
Because that was Old English, Anglo-Saxon for bread.
In Frisian, it's bre.
Bre.
Professor Reiner Salverda, a linguist at the Frisian Academy, is not surprised that my shopping expedition was a success.
How strong is the connection between Frisian and English?
Because it's generally held amongst linguists that English and Frisian are the closest relative within the large Germanic family. And there are these lexical and sound and grammatical similarities that still prove the point today. There are a number of words like skeep for sheep, goose for goose, rain for rain. So we have a lot of similar words. I've often heard stories from old Frisian skippers who told me that they'd been sailing up the east coast of England and Scotland. And I said, okay, so what did you speak then? And I said, well, if we go to a harbour and we come to a pub, we just speak Frisian and they understand us.
So skipper, is skipper a Frisian word?
Skipper is a Frisian word.
These are the words, sounds and grammatical rules that took root in mainland Britain 1,500 years ago. So could it be that people in Friesland are the distant cousins of today's East Anglians? Back at the lab, Sir Walter Bodmer and his researchers have finally analysed DNA drawn from hundreds of people in Norfolk, Suffolk and Lincolnshire. So have they found signs of the old Anglo-Saxons who invaded Britain 1,500 years ago?
The main thing we can say about East Anglia is that they are different genetically from the people that we think of as the Celtic fringe, Devon, Cornwall, Wales, Pembrokeshire. You can think of the people of that part of the country as the closest representation we have in this country to the Anglo-Saxons.
It seems then, from the DNA research, that compared with the Celtic West Country and Wales, today's East Anglians have a clearly distinctive genetic signature, which is overwhelmingly Anglo-Saxon. This suggests that the Anglo-Saxon invasion of Britain may well have involved a massive historical rupture.
So there has been a violent Anglo-Saxon takeover after all, of the blood and tissue of the British people.
Archaeologists know of no mass graves. We have no sign of a genocidal slaughter of the indigenous Celts. And yet the DNA record nevertheless would suggest that the Celts were driven violently from their land, westwards across Britain. The Angles and Saxons did not mingle with the Celts. The Celts were purged. The English language established itself not because it was forced on the Celts, but because it became the most common language. But though the DNA, which is shared in common among the East Anglian volunteers, betrays a strong Anglo-Saxon signal, that doesn't mean that every individual in the study perfectly fits this regional profile. Now it's time for the individual volunteers to find out how English they really are. Racing champion Martin Brundle comes from a family that has lived in Norfolk for generations. Armed with his results, I pay him another visit.
Your results are good, and they're quite clear. All taken together, it suggests that you are 3 times more likely to be of East Anglian Anglo-Saxon stock than of any of the other bloodlines.
Oh, it's nice, isn't it? It sort of reassures you and confirms that you're who you think you are and you come from where you expected to be found.
So, Martin's genetic profile is emphatically 3 times more strongly Anglo-Saxon than Celt.
Your bloodstock, when you go right back to the start, comes out of northern Germany. You know, you are part of an ancient immigration. So although your people now are very fixed, at one point they weren't. And they came a long way before they found this place and where they put down deep roots.
You don't think I'm related to Michael Schumacher, do you?
I didn't really want to go there, but since you bring it up. So this is Kate from Suffolk, and Kate's maiden name was Mayhew.
Okay.
Hello.
So
Nice to meet you.
Great to meet you, yes, and it's great that you could take part in this study.
Yeah, it's very exciting.
Yeah.
Catherine has travelled to Oxford for her results. She's very much hoping to find out that she's descended from an ancient Celtic tribe.
What this says is you're at least 1.5 times more likely to be an Anglo-Saxon than a Celt.
Right.
But I think there's no doubt that you come from where you think you come from in that way.
So there's little evidence of the Iceni in Catherine's DNA. The pattern in her genes is 1.5 times more strongly Anglo-Saxon than Celt. But is she disappointed?
Kate, how does it feel to see scientific proof of a connection to the Anglo-Saxon?
Oh, it's unbelievable to know that we've been there from all that time, thousands of years. It's just incredible.
And you do belong in your part of the world.
I do, don't I? I haven't got to move.
And you like it there, so that's a good
I love
thing.
it, yeah.
Okay.
Sir Walter's epic study has now produced clear regional DNA signatures for the Celtic people of Devon, Cornwall and southwest Wales, and the Anglo-Saxons of East Anglia. But now the team are heading up the coast to the northeast to work out who the Geordies really are. We know that the original inhabitants of the northeast were Celtic. We also know that in the 5th and 6th centuries, the Anglo-Saxon kings extended their rule this far north, and that later, in the 9th and 10th centuries, Viking raiders landed on the Northumbrian coast. So, it's possible that the volunteers giving blood in Newcastle could be, to various degrees, Celtic, Anglo-Saxon or Viking.
Well, I favour Viking.
Viking, because I love going to Norway and I feel really at home there.
Well, I would say maybe Viking and Saxon, definitely.
So I know my grandparents are from Scotland, but that doesn't mean anything. Could be Celt, could be Saxon.
Yeah, I suppose I fancy myself as a Viking. Most people do.
My own family name originates just north of here, from the Scottish borders. So what does that make me? Sir Walter has agreed to test my DNA too.
As a Scot, I've always been very sure of my national identity, But of course, I've got no way of knowing just how Scottish or Celtic my blood actually is. Only the results of the DNA test will answer that question. But I do know that my surname has connections to the borderlands between England and Scotland.
So my ancestry could be, God forbid, Anglo-Saxon. And indeed, despite my dark hair, it's not beyond the realm of possibilities that there's Viking in there too. One of the most dramatic clues we have for the Viking incursions is here amid the ruins of Lindisfarne Monastery, 50 miles north of Newcastle. The pagan Norse Vikings came here to plunder Lindisfarne in 793 AD.
One author said of the attack, they were like stinging wasps, and they spread in all directions like horrible wolves, wrecking, robbing, shattering and killing, not only animals, but also priests, monks and nuns. They came to the church of Lindisfarne, slayed everything alive, dug up the altars and took all the treasures of the holy church.
Were the Viking assaults just a series of smash and grab raids? Or did the blonde-haired, blue-eyed Norsemen leave their genetic mark on the region? Did they rape as well as pillage? Did they settle and marry? One of the Geordie DNA donors is ex-miner Jack Graham. His family have been in the area for generations. I meet Jack in Greenside, a former pit village just outside Newcastle, with his daughters Beth and Catherine.
My grandparents all lived within about 25 miles away from where I live here in Greenside.
And how far back have you been able to take your family line?
To 1778. One of my great-great-grandfathers left the land to work in the pits and the mines.
What do you hope or expect from the genetic test results?
Well, I hope I find out, just where I originated from. I would expect Viking genes in us somewhere.
Oh, I think Viking as well.
So that's your gut instinct?
That's my gut instinct.
You're a Scandinavian. You see, that's the thing, when we get to the genetics, it could turn up anything for you. I mean, I've had my sample taken, I don't know what my results are going to be. But because we are modern British, we could find out that we've got almost any roots at all, because everybody's come here.
Aye. I've always thought Viking genes.
Always felt like a Viking, have you?
I get the impression that Geordies tend to think of themselves as a breed apart. Many believe the region has strong links with the Norse Vikings. And if not Viking, they tend to imagine themselves as Celts. I'm surprised at how few of them think they're Anglo-Saxon. Well, we're about to find out who the Geordies really are. What's the truth about Geordies? DNA samples from volunteers in the northeast have been handed over to a team of scientists in Oxford who aim to establish which ancient people is the most clearly represented in the Geordie genes. Many of the volunteers are hoping the study will reveal Viking blood coursing through their veins. But here we hit a bump in the road. The trouble is, there's more than one kind of Viking blood.
The Vikings came from two different areas of Scandinavia. The Norse Vikings came from Norway and travelled across the north of Scotland. The Danish Vikings laid waste to the east coast of Britain.
The original Vikings were the Norsemen, but over time their empire spread south to Denmark, into territory populated by Anglo-Saxons.
Incredibly, the Danish Vikings and the Anglo-Saxons came from exactly the same area. All that separates them is a couple of 100 years. So they bring the same genetic stock into England.
So although we can tell the DNA of a Norwegian Viking from that of an Anglo-Saxon, we can't distinguish between the Danish Vikings and Anglo-Saxons. Genetically, they look the same. It's like the Dane Vikings were really just Anglo-Saxons in longboats. And these days, historians believe that the Vikings who came to this part of Britain were mostly from Denmark. Time to look again at language. If there's one extraordinarily distinct thing about the Northeast, it's the dialect. So, for a lesson in Geordie, I'm meeting up with linguist David Simpson.
A lot of people think of the Northumbrian dialect as being Scandinavian, but it's Scandinavian in the sense that it's Angle, not in the sense of it being Viking. People may have heard of the Toon Army, the Newcastle United supporters. Toon is the local word for towns, and it derives from tun, which we find in lots of place names, which originally meant village or enclosed place. And the Anglo-Saxon pronunciation of tun in these place names was toon. So the Geordies are using a very old pronunciation there. In Tyneside and Northumberland, we might say "auld wife." Now, a wife is a woman, whether she's married or not. And in Anglo-Saxon, it was the same. A wife was a woman. In fact, an Anglo-Saxon would have understood the phrase "auld wife," meaning old woman.
What about place names? What can we get from that?
Well, place names is interesting. I have here a map of the Northumberland area. And in the green here, I've highlighted names like Ington and Ingham. Ing usually signifies a family group. So the first element of most of these place names would be somebody's name.
Right.
But these names are Anglo-Saxon,
Right.
and that's the interesting point.
When it comes to looking at the place names as you've done, what do you think it tells you specifically about where the incomers came from and where they settled?
This is the Lake District over here, and in the south we're getting into Yorkshire. And the orange are Viking place names, Bee and Thorpe. And what is striking about Northumberland is that they're absent.
So it's the Anglo-Saxons that really settled here?
Yeah.
So despite a widely held belief that the distinctive Geordie dialect hails from Norway, according to David, there is a very clear Old Anglo-Saxon influence. So who really are the Geordies? Back in Oxford, Sir Walter and his team have now analysed DNA from all the Northeastern volunteers, and the results are finally through. It's the moment of truth for the Geordies.
We have a result that I think is very interesting, that suggests that maybe even a little more than 75% of the northeast population that we've done is of Anglo-Saxon origin. The rest is Celtic. That's the comparison we've done.
So Sir Walter can find no evidence of the Norse Vikings. If they came here at all, they did not settle in any significant number. Remarkably, 3/4 of the regional gene pool tested in the northeast matches the Anglo-Saxon genetic signature. However, it's impossible to say how much of this was brought over by the Anglo-Saxons or later by their descendants, the Danish Vikings. Nevertheless, it suggests that, at least genetically, Geordies are not the breed apart that some of them think. The remaining 25% of the Geordie gene pool, a minority, is Celtic, dating back very possibly to the earliest hunter-gatherers who first settled in this region. Now it's ex-miner Jack Graham's turn to find out who his ancient ancestors were.
Walter, this is Jack Graham from near Gateshead and his daughters Beth and Catherine.
Oh, it's a pleasure to meet you. Thanks for taking part.
Jack was quite confident of having Viking blood.
The Vikings came from two areas. There is one particular white chromosome type that we find is common in the Norse Vikings, and you don't have that one. So,
I see.
And then there were the Danish Vikings. Now, the Danish Vikings came from just the same parts of Denmark that the Anglo-Saxons did. You turn out to be 7.5 times more likely to be Anglo-Saxon than Celt, because you've got very little origins from the Celtic fringe.
So Jack's genetic profile is a massive 7 times more strongly Anglo-Saxon than Celt. On his DNA, there is no sign of the genetic marker carried by descendants of the Norse Vikings.
What do you think of this, Beth?
I feel a bit sorry for my dad. He's had his heart set on being a Viking.
I think you should like your results, actually.
He's just thought he's not a Viking.
You just say you're a Danish Viking.
Danish Viking, that'll
say you're a Danish Viking, and nobody can argue with that.
Don't you, Dad?
So Geordies are denied a genetic link with the Norse Vikings. And yet, Viking fans in Newcastle and South Shields shouldn't be too disappointed. It's entirely possible that the Danish Vikings settled here in large numbers. The rub is, you're the same genetic stock as the English. And what about me? What kind of DNA is coiled in my cells? And is my sense of self about to be rudely challenged?
Well, as it turns out, I am a whopping 3.5 times more likely to be Celtic than to be Viking or Anglo-Saxon or any of the other Johnny-come-latelys. I wasn't sure how I was going to feel about getting my results, but you know, it is nice to know that my lot were here first. By rights, all of this belongs to me.
We can now see emerging a clear genetic line taking us back to the distant past. The results show that within just a few centuries, large numbers of people did come to Britain from southern Scandinavia and northern Germany. And unlike the Romans, where a small ruling elite left no genetic trace, they transformed not just our language and culture, but also our DNA.
But those Germanic invaders weren't the last visitors to these shores.
In the next episode, I'm off to Orkney, in search of the elusive Norwegian Vikings. I'll be travelling through the middle of England on the trail of the Normans, and I'll be revealing the modern face of Britain.
Find out how to investigate your ancestors at channel4.com/history. John Travolta wants cash, and Halle Berry's gonna help him. Swordfish, next.